right, so once again, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to have you here. I think Thomas' presentation just now probably already created some feelings in all of you. Did you feel rather put off, or would you agree with him? What's your feeling about what he said?
It's for me, okay. I don't know. It's very cool subject for, and it's originally subject because it's not a classical subject, and it's a complicated subject, ethical of developers, and it's more important for me, and because I think I ask all question you work in. To work, it's essential in my work and all for dev, but for a project, and it's simply happens, but it's very important for me. The ethical. It's only
question.
Yeah. It's only. It's more important or a feature or a subject, or it's more important.
Got it. Awesome. So, Camille, if we assume that every invention is always kind of like developed by humans, right? Like, I mean, any kind of technology that is created today comes from potentially someone in this room or any engineer somewhere on this planet. Where do you see challenges in the process of creating technology and innovation?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So before answering to that, I'll tell you where I'm coming from and why I think I have something to say on that topic. So before creating goshaba, I was a researcher at Harvard, and I have a PhD in neuroscience, so I was working in neuroscience and cognitive science. I was researching how people make decisions. And one thing that you've probably all heard about is cognitive biases. So I think one way in which when humans create technology, they sometimes make mistakes. It's because humans are not adapted to the world we live in today. We're not adapted to like sitting in a computer and coding softwares that will impact the life of tons of other people. And so I think we all know about cognitive biases, but so there's two that I want to mention here. There's the confirmation bias. So if you think you're coding a tool that is for the good in the world, and your tool is called Facebook, you will still remain convinced that your tool is good for the world, even if you are shown different evidence. So there's confirmation bias, that's a problem. Another problem we have as humans is the fact that we have very short time frame in our understanding of consequences. So it's hard for us to grasp the impact of the technologies that we're creating.
Got it. And I mean, Vincent, from your side, as I understood, you work with very large corporations. When you hear this confirmation bias, you know, like, I mean, from corporates, we rather use that they act very slowly and very, like, let's say, cautious. So how do they deal with AI, and how does the human factor is impacting there?
And the fact that this is exactly what you mentioned, the AI is more and more involved in the decision process of organization, and more largely in society. And as you mentioned, biased, and which could be cautious or uncautious bias, are everywhere. And everybody is cautious. And the problem with AI or machine learning is that it brings steroid level the notion of human bias via the machine learning, because the principle behind the machine learning is to find patterns, find weak signal, and weak signal can be in that bias. So for sure, the system will amplify all bias created by the organizations, or created by the solution used by the organization. And it is clearly something that some organizations are more and more taking into account. And for sure, it's very important to have this kind of discussion with tech and developer like you, because you have to take into account at the beginning of the project that the solution that you will use will be based on you, will be based on data, and data will never be perfect, because data came from human and potentially can have some bias, even if you are not aware of that. and the impact of using this kind of solution, powered by the bias that you have introduced cautiously or unconsciously, will have impact on life and will have impact on society. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to use the right methodology or the right tools in order to be able to mitigate that element.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, if we saw in one of the videos in the presentation earlier that basically there's a difference between basically data-driven decision making, basically, and then like artificial intelligences that kind of like take their own or like learn by themselves, right? So we don't even have an influence anymore on what they learn and how they learn it and how they basically understand what they see. So how would you differentiate between the two?
But currently, in the scope of customer that I'm working with, they are mainly data-driven, because you have to be aware that when we talk about AI, and there was a very interesting speech regarding artificial general intelligence, and that this is clearly not where organizations are today. 99% of machine learning are based on supervised learning, which means that they are based on labeling data, and labeling means involving human in that process. And this is where bias can come. Potentially in the future, using what we have seen before, bias will be mitigated. But I'm not pretty sure that artificial general intelligence will come in 2040, because as Jan Leuken mentioned, we know the target, or we know the mountain, we know what could be the first hill to pass, but we don't know exactly how many hills we'll have to jump. So we have already seen a lot of winters in the AI journey. Maybe in the future we'll have new AI winter, but for sure what we have today has to be taken into account. We have to be aware of what we have today, and we have to try to mitigate all potential ethics elements in what we have today, keeping in mind that potentially in the future it will be different. But there are two different things, that what organization and software development has to take into account today and for the future.
Sacha, I mean, in your research, you're kind of like studying the social impact of AI, right? And like, what would you advise Vincent to take into consideration, like consulting companies, consulting corporates?
Oh, I guess many things. So I guess the double thing you want to see is the social impact and the ethical impact. And even though both are like strongly correlated often, they're a bit different. If ever we take the case of algorithmic bias, I guess that both Camille we're referring to, I think you really have to like have a mix of technical and policy regulations. So for example, if ever we take the example of the data sets, of course, if ever you know like this data set portrays centuries and decades, you know, of our history, it's going to be biased. It's going to have some stereotypes. It's going to have like both good and bad things. One of the ways you could like maybe have a solution is having more audit of this data set, whether it's an internal audit, you know, done by the company, or whether it's one, you know, which is like the GDPR imposed by a European standard. By seeing, you know, is this data set really representative? It can potentially, you know, like cause some biases. Another one that we're discussing before could be more of a technical solution. If ever, you know, you like have some data set of a population which is lacking gender diversity or ethnic diversity, and if ever, you know, it's really like, it's not possible within like this population to have more of this ethnic diversity, for example, then maybe we have to create new data. We have to synthesize new data. And this, of course, has other implications, but can potentially be one of the more technical solutions.
Marie, you're probably the one who was most hands down into actually building it, and kind of like looking at candidate profiles and company profiles and trying to understand how to match them. Is like, what do you think about the kind of like more abstract discussion of how to apply this and how to make it ethically correct, versus kind of like building a business case?
Yeah, sure. I think actually you can't say it's business here, let's not care about ethics, of course. And I strongly believe in education for that. I think the first thing we all have to do as individuals and as companies is to make sure that everyone has a minimum amount of knowledge about what we are doing. And that's what we are trying to do. For example, I think there is a lot of misconceptions about AI right now. Some people, if you ask in the streets, they think that it is already super powerful, that it's about to control everything. And Yann Lequin was mentioned earlier. I think about a year ago, he reminded us that currently the most powerful AIs are not, well, they don't even have the common sense of a rat. So let's not be, too talk about, let's not talk about AI as if it was already something totally powerful, and let's just understand what it is capable of and what it can bring in our daily lives. And if you do this, at least as a business, I think you can make good decisions about how to use AI and tech in general. So our example is about recruitment, and there are very daily life examples on this. If you use data sets, we talked about bias. I think everybody has understood here that machine learning reproduces the bias contained in the data sets. And well, recruitment is obviously a very biased world. Okay, you make decisions who I'm going to hire with bias. And maybe you don't even understand that your decisions are biased, but they are. So if you're using an algorithm where there are no women, no black people, etc., then the algorithm you're using will not lead to more hires for those minorities. So if everybody understands that, the concept of bias, they can anticipate the consequence. And so then has data scientists, as developers, but also has business and HR persons, they can anticipate and say, oh, okay, we are not going to use this in this future in our data sets, so that the algorithms can't feed on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But do you also apply any kind of like technical measurements in your product to like point towards biases or like prevent bias? Or
well, that's actually very complicated to do. You can use test data sets to make sure that certain bias are not reproduced by your algorithms. But who am I to say what is the perfect data sets, right? I could say, okay, there should be at least a few women in my data sets and a few people from underprivileged areas. But if you go deeper and deeper, then it's really hard to say this is the perfect society data set. I can't do that, right?
True, yeah. Jocelyn, I think you mentioned beforehand that you're working on a manifest basically for ethic and tech that kind of like gives it maybe more of a framework and does answer that question.
Yeah, I work actually in a manifest. We be to online, to sign by dev or personnel of informatic or technical. And the manifest say we work only with ethical company, or I try to help a company to as ethical, because for example, GAFA is it's very easy to say it's not ethical, but it's if you want to go to in a GAFA for work with for educate and create a new ethical politics, but and the manifesto say we work only with ask in your jobs and not like a robot to code a ticket only and code and not to ask the task. It's very important for developers to get this task is a sense and it's good for me or for a company, and it's not in a it's important for a value of company or for ethical company.
Just to add up on this, because I think it's really interesting, for me, there is like two questions about ethics in AI. So one is the one that has been largely mentioned. It's how AI learns, right? So if you have a baby or a young child, and the young child learns in a world where all women are cleaning ladies and all men are CEOs, then the kid is going to learn that, right? So that's your bias. There's another bias, which is connected to what you're saying, which I think is really interesting. It's that when you code an algorithm, the algorithm is encoding your opinion as a developer. And this is something that is not talked about enough. So maybe here everybody knows that, but some people don't. So there's a book that I would like to suggest. It's A Weapon of Mass Destruction from Cathy O'Neill. And she says, for instance, if I'm building an algorithm that is deciding on the recipe that I'm going to cook for tonight, if the objective of the algorithm, the goal of the algorithm is to make everybody healthy, it's going to use a lot of vegetables and it's going to, make rice. But if the goal of the algorithm is to make my kids happy, it's going to use a lot of Nutella and ice cream. So this is kind of what you were saying, that developers know that their work has an impact, but they're not necessarily thinking about what type of impact it has. And also, we don't necessarily give them the opportunity to think about what they're coding and why, and what's going to be the impact on that.
We must always ask the question of why I work.
Yeah.
Actually, to add on this, I was at this institutional conference last week, ITU, AI for Good in Geneva. And I think for the first time, one of the key policy messages that came out is that not to have ethical AI, but fair AI. I would be even more precise about this. You need diversity in the data sets and in the coding community. And if ever you don't have both of those criteria combined, then you really cannot claim you have ethical AI or fair one. But also to speak about, because I think you were mentioning about the ethics. Well, I know the topic of this panel is ethics in tech, but we took a bit of a, of a turn of ethics in AI. So fairness is just one of the topics we can mention. And you really have to see it nearly as a chronology. So you have the short-term impact, so privacy, algorithmic biases, transparency. You have the medium one, for example, the impact of labor, and whether we're okay to have full automation. And then you have the longer one, which is more existential threat, transhumanism. So there's really a variety of possible, angles you could interpret this topic of ethical in tech or ethical in AI.
We had a question from the audience. Do we have the cube somewhere, or I think in the back maybe can we get it? I think that would make things a lot easier. Yeah, we don't have to. No, not yet.
It will become on. Okay, is it on? Okay, yeah. Now, I'm sorry to intervene in the conversation. I just want to piggyback on what Camille said. I just want to recall that the current, so AI is an overloaded world, but the current the current progress is based on machine learning, and the coder doesn't code an algorithm that makes a decision. It codes an algorithm that learns how to make a decision. So it does not, it's the distinction. Actually, the word algorithm, as a researcher, is a word that I've just decided to accept it. But it's not an algorithm. It's an algorithm that's been fitted on the data that's biased. Our algorithms know nothing about society. And to go one step further, I've got plenty of friends who do things that I disagree with in AI. But really what they're doing is they're coders, they code something, and somebody who's not a coder sets the goal. It's maybe a minor detail, but I really worry that in terms of legislation and policy, if we don't get the right messages, we're going to have legislations that are useless.
Yeah, so just to make it clear, so I'm not saying that algorithms make decisions, I'm saying that humans make decisions as to how they tackle a problem. So thank you for precising that. Most of the time when we talk about these topics, we talk to people who don't really know what an algorithm is, so we try to find images that make sense, right? But the thing is, when somebody who's not a coder or who's not a mathematician sets the goal, very often the goal is not going to be clear enough. And I think there is an area where the person who codes has something to say. And maybe they realize it or maybe they don't, but when they will actually make the mathematical model, they are making inferences. And so I think it would be interesting to leave space for people who code and who make the models to leave space to think about that. And I think that was your point, is that you don't see them just as mechanics. We should stop seeing developers as people who just you tell them what to do and they do it, because there is creativity in the way the code is going to be written. And I think there is room in that creativity sometimes for ethics.
Mm. I mean, you probably don't have to look even into AI, right? I mean, if you look into history and you say, you take the manual camera film, right? Developed by Kodak in the, 30s, 40s. And it was developed by white engineers, and that's why white people were in very early photographs always better pictured than when you were trying to photograph black people, and they were basically not visible on these pictures, because basically the engineers never thought of, oh, do I want to take a picture of a black person? And that only changed years and years and years later, and I mean, we're kind of in front of the same question again and again and again. Yeah? I mean, Instagram is withholding likes from users in order to make them use the app more. And I mean, I think that's the question of ethics in text, is what do we do as a community of engineers in order to be aware of these flaws that we're building into the system, and where we're basically forcing 100 millions of users into a behavior that was maybe even not intended. So what would you advise people in the room that go back to the office on Monday and have to develop code on what to consider in that process to be more ethical or more diverse?
Well, for me, the number one advice is tell everybody to read Weapons of Mass Destruction. Cathy O'Neill, Weapons of Mass Destruction. The thing is about, I just want to talk about HR because that's where I am too. Goshaba, what we do is we identify candidates, we measure their skills, hard skills and soft skills, and we use video games and cognitive tests to do that. So we create new sets of data. And we use machine learning only to improve the way we collect the data, but we are trying to collect data that is unbiased, and we check actually for the biases that we can check, because we can't check everything. So from my little perspective, where I don't know, I've done machine learning during my PhD, but I'm definitely not a person who does AI for a living. From my perspective, the decision we've made in my company is to create data sets that are not biased. This is what we try to do.
The problem that we have seen regarding bias, and especially metrics, is that it's very hard to define exactly all the potential metrics being able to characterize a bias. And there are a good example in history with a solution named Compass, or an algorithm named Compass, on a specific data set. I don't know if you are all aware of that, but in US, a company have designing a solutions helping judge to know if a person will redo a crime or not after the judgment. And some organizations in US have tested the solution and have determined that they were biased, especially between men and women or white and black person. And when they challenged the organization said, the company who designed the solution said that we tested one metrics regarding the favorable outcome of the solution, and it was good. And the problem with that is that they only test one metrics, and they can have plenty of metrics regarding false positive, true positive or not. And all of the metrics that you can involve cannot be all possible. I mean that you are not always able to follow all the metrics and have positive result on all metrics. So it means that it's not always easy to have something unbiased. And according to me, a data set or an algorithm cannot be unbiased. You can only be able to mitigate or attenuate the bias. So this is something that you have to be aware. And according to me, the most important thing is to be aware of that fact, regarding that fairness is important, accountability of what you will deliver is important, the notion of robustness is also important because you have to be able to challenge what you have designed to know if somebody will be able to alterate the outcome. And we have seen on press a lot of examples of how you can fool an artificial intelligence solutions. So this is very important to always be aware of the research and what we are able to do in order to think about, okay, it is possible, I have to try to mitigate the risk in my solutions. Because AI solution that, as a developer, you will develop can have very important impact, and even impact for you, because if you are designing a recruitment solution or something for justice or even for credit or loan, it will impact you as well, and not just your customer or the person who will use your solutions.
I strongly agree, and I would go even further. Of course, you developers, data scientists, etc., should keep with the pace of technology and know what is AI about, even if you're a React Native developer. I think it's interesting for you, but I would even say that your friends, your mother, your husband, etc., should also know about it, because it's all around us. It's still kind of simple right now. It's gonna go bigger and bigger, and it's impacting our daily lives. So I think we should all, as citizens, know the basics. So you were asking what should you do on Monday, and I would say look at it, try to understand it. Don't become all experts, of course, but you know, search for articles that are actually scientific enough and not saying, oh, hey, we're building the new atomic bomb here, and just stating facts that are not that interesting. And you will see then in your daily lives, where is AI? How is it maybe behaving? And then you can have that critical view on it. And, you know, that's the meaning of citizenship. I think you can then have your own opinions and act accordingly. I think you said that the developers were putting some bias in the developments. I don't know, actually, that may be true, but the bias are definitely in the data sets. And also, people are using machine learning algorithms without actually knowing how it's working, because great developers made standard APIs, and that it is, you know, now it's very easy to use AI, but then maybe they don't know the bias they are putting in their products. There is a very straightforward example of that. Maybe you know about Word2Vec. It is a tool to process language built by Google, and it was released and it was already used by many companies to process natural language, even for recruitment and things like that. And then researchers discovered that it was trained with data that was so biased, and then now in many, many products where nice developers didn't even think about it, there were bias that were pretty bad. For example, what Word2Vec does is building links between words. If you say king, it's going to say, okay, queen. Well, you say, I want the links between feminine and masculine, so you say king. Word2Vec is going to give you queen. Okay, that's fine. But then you say doctor, and he's going to answer nurse. Okay, you say, And then you say programmer, and he's going to say housewife. So that just gives you a small hint of how some good-looking technology ends up in many products with well-intentioned developers, but it creates bad effects. So if you all go home, try to learn a few things about that, maybe you can anticipate the effects and encourage your kids and family to do so as well.
Just something that, because it's ethics in tech, so I'm just going to add something quickly that has nothing to do with AI. the environment. So where like the type of tools that we use to actually do technology have an incredible bad impact on the environment. So that goes from servers and the use of electricity that we should all be aware of. So like, for instance, now I'm actually cleaning my mailbox, even though I don't have the time and it's annoying, because I want to delete all this memory that is stored somewhere in California that's using, even if it's solar powered, the truth is they always also use fossil, like old energy, right? Like oil, to power the servers, to power the AC of the servers. So that's one thing. The other thing is, where do the material come from? I don't know if you've seen mines for the type of material that go in computers, but it's really scary. So every time you buy a new computer, you destroy the environment a little bit more. This computer is going to go in Africa in some horrible waste where children are going to play on. The other thing is the labor, is that most of the time these tools have been assembled by children and children have been involved, and slave labor has been involved in the process of mining and setting the computer. So that's, I don't have a clear solution today, because when we tried, some people tried to create environmentally friendly computers and it kind of failed, or phones. So I don't have a solution, but I think it's something we can all bear that weight. So I'm not the only one thinking about it.
And to jump on what Camille said, so I really love that you spoke actually about the intersection between AI and tech and climate change, because this is something which is so rarely seen. I think this is really, you know, like we've been speaking a lot when we speak about the ethics of tech or the ethics of AI, of the lack of, you know, interdisciplinary curriculum between philosophy and data science, or, you know, like hard skills, soft skills. But I really think also this is something which is missing, you know, a curriculum between climate change, policy, and AI and tech, really. And to go back to your question, you know, so what we should do on Monday, weapons of mass destruction, I think, is one of the reasons I'm here today. It's really one of the books which, you know, sensibilizes so much, vulgarize it, but also really makes you understand what are the key challenges that you can face with AI in your everyday life. Another book I would add to the list is AI Superpowers by Kai Fu Lee, who is, he's a Chinese VC entrepreneur. He's also the person who was in charge of Google China when they tried to implement that before it failed. And I think it's really crucial to understand how ethics is different according to cultural context, according to continents. And right now we might have also a very Western, you know, perspective on it, but privacy is drastically different, you know, according to continents. And if you speak to a Chinese friend, it's going to be seen very differently. Maybe a third thing I would add, because this is also the future which is coming up. So you have all been impacted, we have all been impacted by GDPR. Well, this is also, there's next round of regulation coming up, in good and bad way, with AI deployments. And so maybe you've heard, you know, about all of the list of principles published by the OECD, by IEEE, but also the EU Commission. I would advise everyone to give a look at it, just because it's general culture and it will impact all of us. And there you will find, you know, between 5 and 10 different principles on, you know, how AI ethics is affecting our everyday life. And maybe the last thing to add today is really, you know, to reassess this message I think shared with the panel, that you should really try and wonder when you get at work on Monday, and this is, you know, for the coding community, but for everyone dealing with AI, is my team diverse enough? And what is diversity? Because again, that's something hard to assess, you know. You might have women on your team, but, you know, you have different kind of women too. Is it really diverse? You have different type of men too. So maybe that's one of the crucial messages to keep in mind.
So maybe in the end we all need fully remote organizations to be able to hire people from every continent and every ways of life. I think it's interesting to see all the different areas. You know, we spoke about recruitment, we spoke about the environmental impact and so on. I have another story from the blockchain world, for example, when decentralized autonomous organizations were created, and these developers basically creating businesses that were funded with money that was generated out of nowhere. But then suddenly they were facing the jurisdiction of the country they were actually launching these organizations in. So the Ethereum case, for example, was happening in Germany. For the German tax authorities, it was a German company and was funded by 3 personal individuals that were personally liable, technically. But then there's this like level of technology which is like abstract, and everyone thinks like, oh, this is something else, and it doesn't impact the other means of life, basically. And I think Hakon said that today in his CSS talk, as basically called people out. Like he said, when Microsoft was failing the CSS test, like people went to conferences, and every time someone said something that was not in line with the good intent of fixing this problem, people would stood up and say, "Hey, Microsoft, when are you going to fix this?" And maybe that's also a way, because I believe everyone that's here on stage has a very good intent, yeah, but I'm sure there's enough people out there that don't have a good intent, to start calling them out, basically, and like forcing them into the potential right behavior. Do we have questions from the audience? In general, we have many. Oh, that's great. Where's the little cube? Just if you can just grab it and maybe give it to the left or to the back, whoever is closest. There was someone over here. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I have a question because I saw other talks on ethics in text, and I feel like every time you're talking about ethics in AI, but and especially machine learning, but I feel like algorithm in general should be ethics. Like, let's take for example a feeds algorithm. It's what people read. It's really influential. It's not AI, and it should be as ethics as AI. So I want to understand why people keep thinking about AI when they think about ethics in computer science.
For bad reasons. I think it's just that usually when we talk about ethics, that's where the thing is, there is this weird combination between AI, machine learning, and algorithms that usually when you give a panel and you talk 5 minutes, you don't take the time to differentiate each. So in the book that we've mentioned 10 times now, Cathy O'Neill talks about algorithms in general and algorithms that are used to help decision making. So it's one way to think about it. It doesn't have to be about AI particularly. I think AI gets talked about a lot because of what Mary mentioned, which is that people want to think about a catastrophic future where AI has taken over and robots are the, it's like, it's more, the media seem to be more attracted by that horrible future than thinking about specific algorithms that are used today.
We had another question here in the first, on the left.
I just wanted to add something on Marie's saying about Google. When you look up on Google the German word for female software engineer, Softwareentwicklerin, Google will automatically suggest, did you mean the German word for male programmer, Softwareentwickler? And then a more general question that I think Sacha already approached was, how do you see the relationship between diversity and inclusion and ethics? Will more diverse teams in engineering improve ethics generally?
Again, I think here it's really important to differentiate between ethics, which is really broad, and fairness, which is one of the principles you could tackle, in ethical AI, if we want to speak about this. And if ever you have diversity in engineering teams, so this is a point, we spoke of before, you might be able to spot some unconscious biases. We do see things differently. We do, through our experience, through our empathy, through so many different characteristics of ourselves. And so by having a diversity of people, you really be able to reduce those cognitive biases. It doesn't mean that you're going to eradicate them. It's always, as long as we're humans, we're always going to have some bias, some opinions, But we can try and diminish them so that it has really some impact on everyone and does not discriminate, a particular part of the population.
I have a question or comment to this, what's the alignment of diversity in a team and power structures? Because I think everyone talks about bring in more diversity, but I think if the power structure doesn't change within the team, and you've just, yesterday we spoke about tokenism, how do we deal with that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, if ever you can have it's a pyramid, right? If ever you have a very diverse bottom base, that's great. But if ever the top remains the same, then we have a problem, right? So it's definitely one of the metrics we should take into account, and that's why the question of what is diversity is so crucial, right? What is diversity? Is it just having people, representative of all the different segments of population? Is it also, being more, having some criteria that are not really listed yet, more subtle about it, getting more granularity, and we should definitely pay attention to who's at the top. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe piggybacking on a few things that have been mentioned, it's the comment about the German Google that made me think about this. So until very recently, maybe still today, YouTube was terrible because following the recommendation, automatic recommendations with autoplay that keeps kicking on, you'd go from things that you would show to your kids to Nazi videos in 3 hops. Now, I want to claim that this problem was brought forward to the head of YouTube, the different heads of YouTube, more than once, on several occasions. They didn't fix it. So the point I'm trying to make here is, okay, so most of us are developers. How do we change this? We change this. This is not a developer problem. I mean, this is a management and this is a power structure problem. How do we change this? Because we need to change it, of course. We as developer, we put pressure on our hierarchies. We can decide what kind of jobs we do. We can also explain this to other people. How does it work? Explaining biases, explaining problems is crucial because we need to make things that where people in the power structure are claiming it's not their fault, they can't do anything about this. We need to make it clear that they must do something about it. That's my opinion. You want to react on this?
Thank you. I was actually thinking of talking about that. Is that we're talking about ethics in tech, but actually, I think we should talk about ethics in general, right? Because like ethics in politics, ethics in business, ethics in the financial system, ethics in the way it's shared between the North and the South. I mean, the thing is, we talk about it in tech because I think there was a hope that has partially that the fact that some companies, like, it did change the economy at some point. It became possible for some people, maybe not like me, maybe for some people who usually didn't get rich, it made it possible for these people to get rich, and that was a surprise in an economy that is usually super structured and where if you're at the top, you stay at the top, if you're at the bottom, you stay at the bottom. So there was this dream at some point where we thought, okay, technology achieved that, maybe it can achieve other things. But clearly the dream is kind of gone now, so we can all wake up and... Forget that. Voilà. But I don't think that it's going to be brought back only by tech, except for the fact that technology is now a lobbying power. So that's where, it can... But the problem is, as a lobbying power, it goes hand in hand with oil, it goes hand in hand with other lobbies, so it becomes a larger question, but yeah, it's an important one.
Mm. I mean, maybe it's also based on, the World Wide Web was considered as something that brings freedom, that brings peace, that brings access to information that was beforehand not possible. And that's maybe where this link comes from, like technology to being the solution. And therefore we're having this discussion focused on tech, but I mean, in the end, everything is built by humans. And that's the impact. I think maybe there's not enough fighting, discussing. Like, I mean, if you look at how human rights were developed, there was like 400 years of pretty heavy fights about what's right and what not, and what is the human rights agenda. And I'm not. I don't feel that this is happening in the community at the moment. I mean, does anyone see that differently?
So I cannot speak about like all of the cases, but I know that there's been some uprising from Google, actually. A lot of Google March being conducted, especially in the United States, after, it was revealed that Google had a program with the American Army. And so this is one example of, civil disobedience or coding disobedience, however you want to call it. And maybe that's part of what we need more. But, of course, you cannot do this in all the countries. You need to respect freedom of expression to be able to conduct this. But if ever you do have this, I would encourage everyone to take the advantage of it,
Actually, it's going to be a question for you as well, Gael. So let's say I'm a software engineer and I'm doing something in recruitment. And that's a question for you, Sacha. And I write an algorithm and I say, if this person is black, then let's not hire this person, right? Obviously, it's discrimination, and I'm responsible for this, right? So legally, I would be probably made liable for writing an algorithm that does that. But now, let's say I use a scikit-learn, and it learns from human biases, and the same thing happens, but, am I as liable for this, right? And the relationship I would make is with huge debates around guns in the United States. They say, well, machine guns don't kill people. Humans do, when using machine guns. So is there some parallelism here with AI and the tools and the power of those tools that we're using when we are developing solutions for HR, but also in many other spaces? And who is liable for creating those biases? Am I, as a developer, liable for creating those biases in the algorithm, or are there some regulations on AI and then those tools that can be used, you know.
So it's coming up. If ever you follow the great advice of looking at the European Commission among all of our ethical guidelines, recommendations or principles, one of them is exactly what you're mentioning, accountability. But, you know, it's one thing, you know, to say that the person basically who's commercializing this AI service or product should be accountable. It's another thing to be able to spot who was, you know, the end person responsible for it. So basically, another principle listed is explainability. And often you do have a tension between both of those principles, between accountability and explainability. So in theory, like to recap, in theory, yes, it should be the person commercializing the AI service who should be accountable. But in practice, sometimes it's really hard to trace it up.
Just a super short, super concrete point on that. In recruiting, because of the GDPR, but also in general, companies don't want to let algorithms decide for them because they are liable if there is discrimination, regardless of where the discrimination happened, which was a great news for us. Because, so the thing is, HR tools that use algorithms or machine learning or AI to identify the good candidates, there can be discrimination and then the company is responsible for it. That's why the way we're doing it is we're collecting data that is unbiased, so it's a longer discussion, but as unbiased as can be, so that we know that there will be no discrimination at the end, and so the company won't be liable. So I think there is several safety nets. And it doesn't have to be the final safety net that is like taking the developer and putting him to jail, right? Like there's other safety nets before where the people who are actually giving the orders of which tool to use and how to use them, they are liable today.
But that point is a very, very good question, the problem of accountability. One other example that I often have as a question is regarding autonomous car. And I don't know if you are aware, but you have different level of autonomous in car. And after level 4 and 5, which are the 5 is a fully autonomous car, the company who designed the solution is accountable of any accident. So it means that the impact for the organization is not exactly the same. And that's why some car manufacturers forget or try not to go to level 4 or 5 due to that accountability. Because one very, very important aspect of machine learning, and especially deep learning, is the notion of explainability. As of today, even the top scientists or top researchers are not fully aware of why the system trained using that data. And we don't have enough tools or enough mathematics to be able to understand why the system predict that outcome. Which is mean that the control that we have on the solution is not a full control. So linked to the accountability, it could be a challenge for an organization to put in place a solution.
Thank you very much. The time forces us to close the panel at this point. Before everyone gets up, can everyone get their phone out and please open the swap card app? Everyone? I said everyone. I don't see everyone getting their phones out. Get your phone out. And then if you scroll to the very bottom, there's a link that says rate your sessions. So please take this 1 minute to give the speakers feedback. It's highly appreciated, and we also very much looking for 5 stars. Always okay, especially for this panel. I mean, there's 5 amazing people, 5 stars, right? Makes sense. We're not trying to influence you here, just for the record, of course. It's your free will that you're applying to this feedback form. Thank you very, very much. I think it was an amazing panel. Thanks for all the insight and the discussion and the different viewpoints and the literature recommendations. I think we all have to read up on a lot of books now. Thank you to all of you to join us for the last 2 days. We hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that you take a few things home. We hope that you had a good time with your colleagues. Maybe you met some new friends also. Meanwhile, trying one of the activities outside. And I saw yesterday at LaserTech there was definitely some proper fights going on. So also that is healthy sometimes. We wish you all a fantastic way home. And we dearly hope to see you all back next year. Have a safe trip and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you very much.